If you lived through the 1970s, you remember when a family of 6 had to survive on $20 a week. Today, I'm sharing 20 of those breakfasts, lunches, and dinners that kept families fed. Take fried rabbit, for instance. When the chickens stopped laying and the general store felt too far from the farm, Grandpa would disappear into the woods with his old rifle. Rabbit became Sunday dinner, and Grandma made it stretch for days. She'd flour those pieces just right, frying them in the cast-iron skillet that her mother had passed down. The meat was tender, almost like chicken, but with a richness that filled you up in ways store-bought never could. Every farm family knew the sound of that rifle at dawn meant good eating ahead, and nobody wasted a single bite. And after butchering day, nothing, and we mean nothing, went to waste. Grandma would gather every scrap of pork, the bits that city folks would throw away, and cook them with cornmeal until they became scrapple. She'd pour that thick mixture into loaf pans, let it set overnight, then slice and fry it in the morning. Pennsylvania farm families knew the value of this scrapple so well. Some called it poor man's food, but those farm families knew it was a no-nonsense, protein-rich food that cost almost nothing to make. Milk toast. When someone in the family felt poorly, or when the food budget stretched too thin, Grandma turned to the simplest comfort she knew. Fresh milk warmed on the stove, poured over buttered toast that soaked up every drop like a sponge. It wasn't fancy, but it filled empty stomachs and soothed worried hearts. Children who grew up on farms remember this as their first solid food, their sick day medicine, their bedtime snack when nothing else would do. Sometimes the most humble meals carry the most love, and milk toast proved that every single time. Johnny cakes. When the bread ran out but bellies still needed filling, Grandma turned to Johnny cakes, simple cornmeal pancakes that cooked up golden on her cast-iron griddle. Just cornmeal, water, and salt formed into flat cakes that sizzled and popped in hot grease. Come Easter morning, she'd slice leftover ham thin and tuck it between 2 warm Johnny cakes, creating breakfast sandwiches that made the holiday last another day. The cornmeal soaked up all those smoky ham flavors, and every bite reminded you that the best meals came from using what you had instead of wishing for what you didn't. Cornmeal was cheaper than flour and filled bellies better than most anything else. Grandma would cook it with water and salt until it thickened like pudding, then pour it into pans to set overnight. Come morning, she'd slice that mush thick and fry it golden brown in whatever fat she had on hand. The outside got crispy, while the inside stayed soft and warm. Drizzled with molasses, or topped with a fried egg if the chickens were generous, this simple dish turned breakfast into something that could carry you through till supper without complaint. Louisiana red beans and rice. Monday meant wash day, so Grandma needed meals that cooked themselves while she scrubbed clothes by the creek. Red beans soaked since Sunday night would simmer all day with whatever ham bone she'd saved, filling the house with smells that made your mouth water from morning till night. Louisiana families knew this rhythm. Beans on Monday, leftovers on Tuesday, and rice that stretched every drop of that rich, smoky broth. One pot fed the whole family, with enough left over for tomorrow's lunch, proving that the simplest combinations often made the most satisfying meals. And speaking of satisfying meals, one old hen could feed a family of 8 when Grandma worked her kitchen magic to make chicken barley stew. She'd simmer that bird for hours until the meat fell off the bones. Then add barley and whatever vegetables she'd put up from the garden. The barley swelled up thick, making the broth rich and filling as any meal you could want. The whole house smelled like comfort, and that pot would bubble on the back of the stove all afternoon. Second helpings were always welcome because somehow there was always enough. The way Grandma measured ingredients with her heart instead of cups. Cold buttermilk soup. You'll remember how summer heat made cooking over a firewood or stove feel like punishment. So Grandma found ways to feed the family without heating up the kitchen or getting anyone uncomfortable. Cold buttermilk soup was her secret weapon. Thick buttermilk mixed with chopped cucumbers, radishes, and green onions straight from the garden. She'd add a hard-boiled egg if the chickens had been productive. Maybe some leftover cornbread crumbled on top. It cooled you down from the inside out, refreshing in ways that seem impossible until you've worked all day in fields under the blazing sun. And when the chickens laid more eggs than the family could eat fresh, Grandma found ways to preserve them and make them last. She'd hard-boil a dozen or more of those eggs, then slip them into jars filled with the juice from pickled beets. 2 to 3 days later, those eggs came out purple-pink and tangy sweet, transformed into something that felt almost fancy. It usually wasn't Easter, but the beet juice colored them through and through. And the flavor was unlike anything you could buy in a store. They made everyday meals feel special, turning simple eggs into conversation pieces that tasted as good as they looked. City folks might turn their noses up, but farm families, both old and young, knew that organ meats packed more nutrition than anything else on the animal. Grandma would soak rabbit liver in milk to draw out the strong taste, then flour and fry it with onions until it was tender as butter. The iron-rich meat gave strength to growing children and working men who needed every bit of energy they could get. She'd serve it with mashed potatoes and gravy made from the pan drippings, creating a meal that filled you up and kept you strong for whatever hard work tomorrow would bring. A whole smoked ham was an investment that fed the family for weeks, and Grandma knew exactly how to make every meal from it feel different. She'd boil that ham with potatoes, carrots, turnips, and cabbage, letting all the flavors mingle in one big pot the way New England families had done for generations. The saltiness of the ham seasoned everything perfectly, and the vegetables soaked up those smoky flavors until they tasted like something from a fancy restaurant. This was Yankee cooking at its finest. One pot meant fewer dishes to wash, and the leftovers tasted even better the next day, the flavors having time to marry overnight in ways that made second helpings disappear fast. And speaking of using what nature provided when it provided it, at a time when root cellar held more potatoes than anything else families needed, baked potatoes was a filling food Grandma made that almost cooked itself. She would scrub those big russets clean and slide them right into the coals of the fireplace. The skins would char black, while the insides turned fluffy as clouds, and she'd split them open with a fork to let the steam escape. A pat of butter from the churn, maybe some salt if they had it. And that simple potato became a meal that satisfied like nothing else could. Children would fight over who got the biggest one, and even grown men felt full after eating potatoes that had been kissed by fire. Beef tongue and parsnips. The butcher sold tongue cheap because most people didn't know what to do with it. But Grandma saw opportunity, where others saw oddity. She'd simmer that tongue for hours until it was tender enough to cut with a fork, then peel away the outer skin to reveal meat that was richer and more flavorful than any roast. Served with parsnips that had been sweetened by frost, this became a meal that impressed even the preacher when he came to dinner. The tongue sliced beautifully, and every bite proved that the most unusual cuts often made the most memorable meals. Pone. When the bread ran out, and there wasn't time to wait for yeast to work its magic, Grandma made cornbread pone. Just cornmeal, water, salt, and whatever fat she had on hand, shaped into flat cakes and baked on a hot griddle, or right on the coals of the fireplace. These weren't fluffy like regular cornbread, but dense and filling, the kind of bread that stuck to your ribs and carried you through long days of hard work. Spread with butter and molasses, Pone turned simple ingredients into satisfaction that lasted until the next meal came around. Fried green tomatoes. When the tomato plants were heavy with green fruit, Grandma knew exactly what to do with them. She'd slice those firm green tomatoes thick, dredge them in seasoned cornmeal, and fry them until they were golden and crispy on the outside. Each bite was the perfect combination of tart and savory, with that cornmeal coating giving way to tender tomato underneath. Served alongside her other southern favorites, they were proof that sometimes the best dishes come from making the most of what you have growing right in your own backyard. When the meat ran out, but the family still needed something hearty to pour over biscuits, Grandma made egg gravy that fooled nobody but satisfied everyone. She'd scramble eggs in the same pan where bacon had cooked that morning, adding flour to the leftover grease until it turned golden, then slowly whisking in milk until it thickened into something rich and creamy. Those scrambled egg pieces floated like little clouds in the gravy, and when you poured it over hot buttermilk biscuits, it filled you up just as well as any sausage gravy ever could. And speaking of time of the day in a year, August meant tomato season. And when the vines produced more than the family could eat fresh or put up in jars, Grandma turned them into gravy that made breakfast feel like a celebration. She'd cooked down ripe tomatoes with onions and a touch of sugar, thickening it with flour until it coated the back of her wooden spoon just right. Poured over hot biscuits or fried potatoes, this tangy, sweet gravy tasted like sunshine in a bowl. Every bite reminded you that summer's bounty could stretch well into fall when you knew how to make it last. Please hit that like button so more people can share in these good old times. And if you want more stories like this, I'll be here next week. Until then, celebrate nostalgia and make new good memories.